Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Dee Dee Carmichael, and we are doing another Community Connections interview today. I'm here with Jessie De La Torre from SARC. She's a human traffic victiming advocate. I think I might have got that wrong. And she'll introduce herself and tell us a little bit about what she does at SARC.
Hi. So yes, my name is Jessie. I am the human trafficking victim advocate or anti-human trafficking advocate, whichever one. Part of my role is to educate the community about what human trafficking looks like, as well as if we receive any cases for human trafficking, to casework on them, uh, and just be generally aware of how human trafficking affects our community and what resources we have and we can provide.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Jessie. Obviously, today's conversation is going to be about the topic of human trafficking. I think it's something not a lot of people are super familiar with. So I kind of just wanted to start off by giving you an opportunity to explain what human trafficking is to folks.
Yeah, so human trafficking will be often described as modern slavery, and in many cases, it can be disguised as many other crimes. But the main meaning of what differentiates human trafficking is any use of fraud, force, or coercion to control victims for the purpose of engaging in commercial sex acts or labor services against their will, often in exchange for anything of value, which will usually be money, but not necessarily. It could be drugs. It could even be just food and a place to stay.
Okay. So you mentioned something about it being both, sexual and about other practices as well. So are there two different forms? Can it be like sexual slavery and also more, work related?
Yes. So technically, it gets divided into labor trafficking and then sex trafficking. But even inside those, there are subcategories. So we tend to differentiate them into four. So you got labor, sex, you got gang related human trafficking, and you also have survival sex, which is a type of human trafficking.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. And just to elaborate kind of more on our community in particular, is human trafficking something that's a problem here in our community?
Yeah, so contrary to popular belief, human trafficking is something that can occur anywhere. And it can definitely occur, and we have had cases in our community as well. So when we are looking at how human trafficking will show up in our community, it's really better to look at the different types of human trafficking, like we mentioned, and see how that reflects in our community. So, for example, when we are talking about labor trafficking, we like to look at what are the biggest industries that allow for human trafficking and then compare it to what are the biggest industries that we have in our community, right? So right now, some of the biggest industries for labor trafficking are domestic work, are agricultural as well as factory work. And those happen to be also some of the bigger industries in our community. So those are the places that we would look more into. When we look at any type of sex trafficking, we have been seeing, especially throughout the last couple of years, personally as SARC workers, that we have had received multiple cases of it. I think one of the biggest challenges with human trafficking is that not a lot of people will identify one as a victim of a crime. And if they do, they won't identify as a victim of human trafficking. They might identify as a victim of just sexual violence or just some other type of abuse. So that presents some challenges when it comes to disclosures, but we have seen several cases of that in the Lebanon area.
Yeah. So you kind of answered a little bit of my next question, but in general, what does human trafficking look like here in Lebanon? I know you mentioned the different industries it might show. Are there any other, big signs or red flags of it?
Yeah, so again, human trafficking can look like many things. And I feel usually people will have that image of somebody just randomly coming up to you and snatching you and then locking you up in a basement and forcing you to do things. Um, and although there might have been cases in like history of that happening, that's not usually how it occurs. There's usually a relationship built, and there's a time of grooming before that occurs. So when we are looking for signs in the community, we really want to see uh, things that are just not adding up. So if we were to talk about labor trafficking, for example, we would look at, are the individuals, one, do they speak the language? Because although human trafficking, about 83% of cases of human traffic victims are American citizens. I think a lot of people think that that may be international, but the majority are American citizens.
Mm.
That being said, if they are migrant or immigrant, do they speak the language? So therefore, are they aware of any contracts? Do they understand any contracts that they are signing? Do they understand what they're getting themselves into?
Mm.
Are they working in appropriate work conditions, or do they have the tools that they need to work on those work conditions? Do they have all of their worker rights met? Um, and when we're talking about people that are brought in here, are the uh, properties needed to fulfill the visa requirements being met? So that's kind of what we look at when we're talking for labor in specific.
Mhm.
Uh, when we look at sex trafficking, um, we're really looking at multiple things because, again, this is something that can be masked as other crimes. So somebody might be showcasing signs of just physical abuse or just sexual violence in general. So we're really looking at, is this just sexual violence or is it more? So we can look at, do they have any type of branding or tattoos on their body, such as initials or names, usually money signs or even barcodes, um, ATM machines, dollar signs, anything like that. So do they have a branding? Are they constantly being brought into the hospital for either for sexually transmitted diseases or bruises, or do they have untreated lacerations or scars or inflammation? Um, are they able to freely speak, or do they seem uh, scripted? Do they fear authority, or do they want to like avoid answering questions and like just go in and go out, right? So we're also, especially if we're looking at younger victims as well, uh, are they carrying more money than that you're like, where did you get that, right?
Yeah.
Are they carrying multiple phones, or in general, are they wearing clothes that seem inappropriate for the time of day or the season that we're in? Um, so you're really looking at a lot of different factors that just raise a lot of red flags of, this isn't normal, and this isn't just physical violence or sexual violence. There might be more to this.
Yeah, those are some really good examples of some of the
Mhm.
signs to look out for. So I appreciate you being so thorough about
Yeah.
that, sharing with everybody.
Mhm.
But are there any particularly vulnerable populations for this kind of crime?
Yeah. So something to keep in mind is anybody can be vulnerable to being human trafficked, but there are certain populations for certain reasons that are more vulnerable than others. So what we are seeing is that if homelessness and runaway youth are very vulnerable. We see, and let me preface this with, the numbers for human trafficking, again, are really hard to actually track because most people are not going to disclose as a victim of human trafficking. So the numbers that I'll share, if I share them, it's going to be like, at the very least, this is how many there is. Other studies might show bigger numbers. Um, but with homeless and runaway youth, we are seeing that at least 1 in 5 homeless youth will be trafficked. So other vulnerable individuals can be LGBTQI plus individuals, as they are already around 7.4 times more likely to experience acts of sexual violence than heterosexual individuals. And we are seeing that about 26% of them, especially in their adolescence, are rejected from their families, and about 40% of them can make up the homeless youth population.
Mm.
So with LGBTQI plus, we're seeing that around 1 in 3 of them will be recruited for trafficking within 48 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, so we also see individuals that have been in foster care or child protective services, again, migrant or immigrant workers. Um, individuals that might have some type of mental health or intellectual development disabilities are at a high risk as well. And I feel that's a population that often gets not looked at.
Mm-hmm.
And we can really go in depth as to why, but part of the reality of it, especially when it comes to sex trafficking, is because many people don't want to see them as being sexual,
Right.
but that's irresponsible because they're human, right? So that's still something that is going to occur. And on top of that, depending on what their disability is, they might be unable to take care of themselves. That means that they might have a caretaker, and that caretaker might be the one trafficking them. Um, so they are a very vulnerable population. Individuals that already suffer from substance abuse. So what we see with human trafficking is that if you are not addicted, they will get you addicted because that is how they can control you. And a lot of the times, when you look at the grooming process and how these individuals get them to do certain acts, and might start with, oh, if you do this, you'll get a cut. But then if you get them addicted, is if you want your fix today, if you want this substance today, then you will get this many people, you will get this many numbers.
Right.
Um, and again, it's just easier to control them. If they already have a history of sexual violence, because that is what they believe as normal, and that is what they might believe, or they have been led to believe that is what they deserve, it is, they fall much easier into the life. And what we are seeing is that around 84% of survivors of human trafficking have a history of childhood sexual abuse. Um, Again, anybody that's below poverty level, it's much
Mhm.
easier to fall into survival sex. If you come, an individual that might come from a dysfunctional family dynamic,
Yeah.
and
Define
that can look.
or that term you mentioned, that survival sex term. You said that was a type of human trafficking, but can you just define that a little?
Yeah, so survival sex, it's basically literally engaging in sexual activities in order to have food, in order to have a place to stay, in
Right.
order to have access to what should be natural human needs that you would need to survive. Therefore, when we look at the word force, right, when we're talking about force, fraud, and coercion, when it comes to human trafficking, many individuals might think of it as being violent. And
Yeah.
although that is correct, we also need to look at the word force as in being forced to do something because you have no other choice. In terms of like when you see individuals engaging in survival sex, it's either they do that or they don't have a home, they don't have food, they don't have water, they don't have access to these resources that they might need. And especially if those individuals have a family that they need to take care of, that might put them at a higher risk of having a feeling that they have to engage in that because it's either surviving or not,
Right.
right? So that's usually what we're talking about when we're talking about survival sex. And that is something that we can see at any age range. Um, and lastly, some of the others, if it's an individual that has a history of being in the juvenile or just in general the criminal justice system,
Mm-hmm.
we see something unfortunate that we also see with human trafficking is that there are certain services that are used to help individuals, yet these services are also being used to recruit. So you wouldn't necessarily uh, see the criminal justice system as a resource necessarily to help, but it is an enclosed environment where a lot of individuals already experience or have some of these other vulnerabilities that we're talking about. And so they'll either get recruited inside, or if they're coming out, they'll get somebody recruiting them outside. Like, do you have anywhere to go? Come
Right.
with me, right?
Right.
But what we're also seeing is we can see individuals recruiting in shelters. We can see individuals recruiting in halfway houses. So because these are resources that house a specific type of vulnerable population, these recruiters are going in there to be able to to manipulate them, right? And lastly, something else that we're seeing as a vulnerable population is, of course, minorities. So in Lebanon specifically, we are seeing that the Hispanic minority as well as African American individuals are highly susceptible for this type of crime as well, or to fall victims of this as well. So those are some of the vulnerabilities that will make somebody more susceptible to falling for this crime.
Yeah, thank you for all of those. Some of those are things I wouldn't have necessarily expected. The disabled populations, probably for the same reasons you mentioned. But yeah, no, it's really nice to see kind of like a holistic overview of all of those different risk factors for that. But you had also mentioned recruiters, you called them, and so I'm kind of interested in hearing more about that and what are the signs of those traffickers, any characteristics you can expect from those kinds of people, or patterns of those people who are seeking out people to victimize?
Yeah. So I think one of the scariest things about human traffickers is that there is no one type. A trafficker can be anybody. It can be from what I believe is the more usual image that people might have, an older male, but it could also be a caregiver. It could be a mother. It could be a doting father figure or a doting father figure. It could be a young high school girl. We're really seeing recruiters and traffickers vary in socioeconomic backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds and in age, as well as, of course, in gender and sex. So there's really not one thing that'll pinpoint them. The only thing that'll really put them all together is that they are great manipulators. That is what they're good at. They are charming. Usually they're charming because they need to disarm you. They need you to trust them. So if anything, a lot of the times they might be in positions, especially if they're older, that give them that, in positions that you would see them and it's like, but how can that person do something like that, right? Because they put themselves in positions in which they have certain amount of power and certain amount of trust allotted to them because of them. So it's really hard to really describe traffickers besides they are great manipulators. What we're also seeing with traffickers specifically is that there's a grooming process, of course, for how they get their victims. So again, it's really, really, really rarely just a stranger that is going to approach you because they need to build up that bond with you. They need you to feel that they are the only person that cares about you and your entire life and that they're the only person that can trust. So what we see is that they will make a victim feel attractive, valued, and special. And to put it more in an empirical meaning, they'll usually follow Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And hopefully many of us are familiar with it. So they will usually, especially if you fall under a vulnerable population, a lot of what they'll only need to fulfill is the psychological and safety aspect of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But even with that, we see them, especially if they're sex trafficking, that they'll also fulfill the belonging and love, because if they have a sex trafficking ring, they have these family dynamics added to them, in which if there's multiple girls or girls and boys or boys or whatever, they're siblings. So you will call them sisters. They are your sisters. If it's a male that is the trafficker, you might refer to him as daddy. And if it's a female, it might be the mom. So they still try to also fulfill this family need, even though it's not necessarily it, and it's just a controlling tactic. But that is what we're seeing with traffickers. And again, it can be anybody. We're also able to see that sometimes there might be like a top trafficker and they have bottom recruiters that are different ages to be able to recruit different people. So we have had, not here, but we've had cases prior, just in general, of high school girls that are recruiting other high schoolers. And it's a high school girl. You're not going to believe that this person is like having a trafficking ring, but they do. Same with young boys, like in their 20s and stuff like that. They'll use them. They, even if they are not the top honcho, they will be used to recruit others. So realistically, traffickers and recruiters come in various forms.
Right. I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask you if there's any kind of like peer-to-peer recruiting with the themselves, but I think you answered that. We actually have a question in the chat box.
Ooh.
Josh Mounts, he's asking, is there an age range that's more at risk, or adolescents or young adults perhaps?
So when we're looking at age range, what we see is that the average age will be around 13. Now, some studies might say 12 to 15, but the majority will adapt to 13 years of age, bless you, being the average age range into being trafficked. Again, rather than age being an enormous factor, I would say more vulnerabilities. But I guess even though we see a high range, because you can see somebody younger, like we will see children or babies being trafficked, all the way to much older individuals in their 70s, 80s, a more mature population will see being trafficked. So really, again, anybody can be. But if we're talking about the average age, it will usually be 13 or anywhere from 12 to 15.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little younger than I expected.
Yeah, and to add to that, and this is, to add to the, oh wow, that is really sad, what we're also seeing is that it is suggested, so it's not 100% proved, but it is suggested that from the time of lure to the time of death, the average lifespan of a trafficking victim is around 7 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
For the average 13-year-old, 20 years would be your predicted lifespan.
Yeah.
Wow.
So either they are able to leave the life, or they commit suicide, or they are killed by violence, whether by their pimp or trafficker or by the Johns or whoever is buying them, or just the job in itself.
Wow, that's a really inspiring statistic. Thanks for sharing that, Jesse, or suggestion. I guess it's not proven, but
yeah.
So I had another question kind of related to our current situation. How is the COVID-19 pandemic affecting human trafficking? Is it having an impact on that?
Yeah, so I think that many individuals might believe that with our current situation, it will actually make it harder for human trafficking to occur, right? Because we're not supposed to be out in the streets. The problem is that in order for human trafficking to occur, you do not need transport. You do not need to move from one place to another. If anything, a lot of these can be happening again in the home, by caregivers or whoever the parental figure is, if it's a minor. But also it can be happening online, right? For a very general one, if you watch porn, are you aware that the person that is there is actually there consensually, or are they being pressured or forced to be there, right? And especially what we're seeing in trends in porn is that the more homemade the video looks, the more views it gets. So now you don't even need to look like you're a high-star studio, which makes it easier for these traffickers to be able to profit from using these victims, because they don't even need to spend that much money in making a video look good. So, or you have webcamming and all of that stuff. Like, are those victims being forced? On top of that, we also fall back into the category of survival sex. So what we're seeing for victims in general, either of physical abuse or sexual violence or even human trafficking, is that in cases like natural disasters or pandemics, or something like COVID-19, they might be forced to go back into an environment that is not safe, or they might be forced to engage in activities that put them at risk, because it is what gives them a home. It is what gives them food. It is what gives them access to these things that they need to live. So if anything, right now, a lot of like our worries is that population that might be falling into that, because they have nowhere else to turn to, or they have nothing else to really do to survive. So situations like this, if anything, what they do is that a lot of the times they minimize the amount of resources that a victim / survivor might actually have access to, even if it's just escaping. So.
Right. And that's a great point about the online trafficking and all the opportunities in the sex industry for that to occur online.
Yeah. So
Yeah. So, what should somebody do if they suspect human trafficking is occurring? What are the next steps?
So if you think that either you are a victim or you think that somebody else might be a victim of human trafficking, I think maybe alerting authorities. So just 911,
Right.
alerting authorities. There is a human trafficking national hotline that they can access, and you can just look it up on Google. Or if you want to look for resources for a survivor, or are a survivor and you would like more resources, or you don't know what to do, or you're not sure, you can always call SARC. We have a 24/7 hour hotline, and we're always there to help, and we'll try our best to at least connect you with the resources that you might need.
Yeah,
So
and you can find that number ticking across the bottom of the screen as well if you're in that situation. Okay, so is there anything else that you would like to share with our viewers, about human trafficking, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, anything?
yeah, so the last thing, and this is just how I like to finish all my presentations and stuff like that. So actually, two things. Let's do this. So I want to do a quick exercise. And I like doing this exercise because I feel that even though a lot of people might see human trafficking and they might think this is horrible, right? And this shouldn't happen and nobody should experience this. But I still believe that they don't feel as connected to it. They think that is something still foreign, and they think that is something not related to them. So I like to do this exercise in order to show how prevalent it actually is, and how we all actually contribute to that system. So, Didi, did you brush your teeth this morning?
I did, yes.
Great, awesome. So, for anybody else that also brushed your teeth this morning, the palm oil used in toothpaste is a really big industry for child labor, so child human traffic labor. So that doesn't mean that you're gonna go and stop brushing your teeth, right? But again, I just like using this exercise to showcase how we all actually still contribute to this industry, and how connected it is. It is the second most profitable industry that we have right before drug trafficking.
Wow.
So, and it's still growing. And many individuals, especially if they are in the drug trafficking industry already, are turning into human trafficking because, unlike drugs, humans can be sold several times.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's really big, and we all have an impact in it every day, even by the clothes that you wear and you use,
Yeah.
services that you might inquire. Um, so I always like something that I tell people to, if they're like, well, how can we stop this as well, is one, just being aware that it does exist. Um, Being aware of how you also contribute to the industry one way or another. Being aware what policies are in your community or in your country or state or whatever that might contribute to this and to this being able to occur, whether it be in the labor area or whether it be in the sex area. Um, as well as being aware of like what resources are in your community that might help these individuals, and are they following, or are there resources like shelters and stuff like that, and are they following what what they should be following, like the laws and rules that they should be following in order to be able to present a safe environment for everybody, right? um, and with that, the other thing, and this is how I actually this is how I like to end my presentations. It's a quote by Dr. Luttrell, and it says, the eyes don't see what the mind does not know, which means if you're not aware of something, you're not going to be able to identify it. So sometimes we have to have these difficult conversations. We have to come to peace with the fact that these horrible things can and do happen in our community. And
Yeah.
on top of that, we have to be aware of our biases as well, and how we approach certain individuals that might trigger some thoughts of, oh, well, this happened to them because they put themselves in that situation, or of course this is going to happen to them, blah, blah, blah. Like, why are your biases, why are you thinking like that? And on top of that, making a peace with the fact that sometimes people that you admire, that you look up to, that you trust, that you love, might be the individuals hurting others,
Right.
and they might be the ones that are doing these horrible crimes. And that doesn't mean that you all are a horrible person because you looked up to this person, but rather I think that gives you then the job of, okay, how can I make this right now? Right. Like, so I think it's our moral responsibility to be aware and to believe victims when they come forward with something like that, whether it be human trafficking or whether it be just sexual or physical violence. And understand that it has nothing to do with you and your person and your choices in life, but rather how can I help this individual be in a safe place? Um, so, and especially in times like this, I think we all owe it to each other to help each other and take care of each other as best as we can, as best as we can. And sometimes that means taking care of yourself first, right? But
Absolutely.
yeah, but that's just my PSA.
Thank you so much for being on today and for doing your part to spread the awareness about this issue. We really appreciate having you. I know that United Way of Lebanon County commented in our live stream comments with the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So that resource is there, as well as a text line for folks who are in that situation as well. So I just really appreciate you being here today, Jesse, and for sharing that with everybody. Thank you so much. And that's it for today, guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. And if you want any more resources or information, you can head over to the SARC page, and you have access to all of that there as well. And thank you so much for having me, Dee Dee. It was so fun.